Okay, so solving rational equations can look one of two ways. The first one I want to talk about looks like a proportion. If you remember what proportions are, if you have one fraction equals another fraction. So let's think about when back in grade school, you might have had, I don't know, 4 over 11 equals x over, I don't know, 10. And you would cross multiply 11x equals 4 times 10 is 40, and divide x equals, and if it doesn't go in even, you just leave it. So this was back in your grade school days. Now we're going to look at high school proportions. But still, when you have one fraction equals another fraction, you can just cross multiply like over here. So what we're going to do is take 4 times 5c minus 3, bring down the equals, 3 times 4c plus 6. I'll be honest, these are the easiest equations to solve. You just cross multiply, set them equal. Now we need to distribute. Distribute again. Now just solve for the variable. So I'm going to get the variable on the same side. Then I get my constants on the same side. Divide by 8. And I can't take 30 divided by 8, but I can reduce them both by 2 because they each contain a common factor of 2. 15/4. Now, I'm going to caution you. The one thing you have to look for, I'm going to call these excluded values. Excluded values are any values of the variable that would make the denominator equal 0. Where do you see in the original problem, think about where do you see a variable in the denominator? Right here. So my excluded value would be anything that would make 5c minus 3 equal 0. So add 3, divide by 5. So my excluded value is positive 3/5. You always need to compare to make sure your answer does not match your excluded value. So we're okay. This is what c cannot be because that would make it equal 0. This is the answer. All right. So let's look for those excluded values right away just to get them taken care of. So the first thing you notice to figure out what makes x squared minus x equal 0, really I wanted to say not equal 0, right? And to figure that out, we just factor. So this means that x cannot equal 0 and x minus 1 cannot equal 0 or x cannot equal 1. Notice if I plug 0 in for x, it would be 0 in the denominator. If I plug 1 in for x into either side, it would make the denominator equal 0. So my two excluded values, the numbers I can't use, are 0 and 1. All right, now we're going to cross multiply to solve it. X squared minus x times 1 is just x squared minus x equals 2 times x minus 1. So I need to distribute. And if we're left with x squared, we got to get everything equal to 0. So I'm going to minus the 2x from my x. So I have x squared minus 3x but I want this to equal 0, so I'm going to add 2 to the other side. And to find my two values that make it equal to 0, I'm just looking for my zeros right now. Factor x and x, factors of 2 that add to get 3. Minus 1 minus 2, because they multiply to get negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2. Negative 2 plus negative 1 is positive 3. So what are the zeros? X equals 2, x equals 1. All right, but let's look. What are the two numbers we can't use? 0 or 1. So I'm going to come down here and cross off the 1. The only number that I can use is 2. We call 1 an extraneous solution. It's a solution to this problem, but it doesn't work in my original problem. All right, this is where it gets a little more complicated. We still start by listing any restricted values. Now think about it this way. When you look at this problem, you notice, first of all, this is different from the first two examples because I don't have one fraction on both sides. I have lots of fractions. And let's be honest, it's the fractions that make this problem hard, right? So let's get rid of the fractions. Let's get rid of the denominator and make the problem easier to solve. So the first thing that I want to do, what are any values we cannot use because it would create 0 in the denominator? Well, the only one is x. So that just means x cannot be 0 because if I put 0 in for my x's, there'd be a 0 in the denominator. That's the only value we cannot use. So what are the factors of my common denominator? I need an x and I need a 2. So think back to when we're building our LCD. I need each factor that's in the denominator. I need both the 2 and the x. So what we're going to do, technically what we're going to do is multiply both sides by the common denominator. Now, I'm going to do that. I'm going to distribute it all the way across. So I think it's easier to do if we take our LCD and distribute it and look at each one times that 2x. So this x cancels. 2 times 4 is 8. Bring down the plus sign. The 2 cancels. X times 5, 5x equals the x's cancel. 2 times negative 11, negative 22. Now, isn't this equation, doesn't that look a lot easier to solve than the original? So your goal is to multiply by the common denominator so that all the denominators cancel. Now I just get my 8 over on the same side as 22, which is negative 30. Divide by 5. And compare. Negative 6 does not match my excluded value, so we're good to go. All right, example 4. Once again, I can't cross multiply because I don't have one fraction on this side. So what's my excluded value? What would make x minus 2? I can't have it equal 0. So you just set it not equal to 0 and solve. X cannot equal 2 because that would make 0 in the denominator. All right, what's my common denominator? X minus 2. That's my only factor that I have in the denominator. Be careful though, I'm multiplying each side. I'm multiplying the whole equation by x minus 2. So it's helpful to write it next to every single part of the equation. So this one cancels this one out, and I just have 5x. Bring down the equal sign. 7 times x minus 2. X minus 2 cancels, bring down plus 10. Distribute. Combine like terms. Oh, see, I said distribute and then I forgot. That's a 14. Combine like terms. I have to move the 7x over to be with the 5x. Negative 2x. Divide by negative 2. So I get my solution to be x equals 2. But what's the one answer we cannot use is 2, because if I plug 2 into my original equation, I would be dividing by 0. So this does not work. This is an extraneous solution. So this means there is no solution that makes the equation work. So anytime you don't have an answer, you just do a circle with the line through it. That tells me there's no answer that makes it work. All right, last problem. First, I'm going to look at my excluded values. I'm going to factor this first. So notice these have something in common. My excluded values, what are the values we can't use because it would be 0 in the bottom? What number would make x plus 1 equal 0? Negative 1. What would make x minus 1 equal 0? When x equals positive 1. So the two answers we cannot use, positive 1 and negative 1, because they would create a 0 in the bottom. All right. So I'm going to multiply through by the common factors to get rid of all my factors in the denominator. So notice my common denominator would be x plus 1 and x minus 1. I'm going to multiply the entire equation by the least common denominator. X plus 1, x minus 1. X plus 1, x minus 1. X plus 1, x minus 1. All right. In the first fraction, the x plus 1's cancel, and I'm left with 4x plus 1 times x minus 1 equals. Notice both of the factors cancel. I'm just left with 12 in that portion. Plus 3, and let's just distribute the x plus 1 times x minus 1. Remember, that's just x squared minus 1. Remember the x squared minus 1, when I factored it, we're just going to put it back in standard form. Now I'm going to distribute. Distribute the 4x. Distribute the x 1. Distribute the 3. Now I'm going to combine like terms. I can combine these x's. I can combine the 12 minus 3 to get 9. Now I want to put everything on the same side as my x squared. So I'm going to subtract 3x squared from 4x squared. Let's just get rid of the 9 minus the 9 from both sides, because our goal is we want to have the right side equal 0 so we can factor the left side. 4 minus 3 is 1, x squared. Bring down the minus 3x, negative 1, negative 9 is negative 10. Now we just factor x and x minus 5 plus 2. So what are the values that make each one equal 0? X equals 5, x equals negative 2. When I compare, neither one match. So these are my two solutions.